The night wrapped itself around the small farmhouse like a heavy, unshakable shroud. Outside, the Oregon wind whispered low through the fir trees, brushing against the windows with the gentlest of sighs. A thin silver moon hung over the fields, casting long, fragile shadows across the empty porch. Inside, the silence was even thicker. Sarah sat alone on the edge of the couch, the fabric worn and soft beneath her hands. She clutched a baby blanket to her chest, pale yellow, frayed at the edges from countless washes, the same blanket that once swaddled her daughter, Lily, before the world had changed. In the dim nursery down the hall, a faint glow from a night light revealed the fragile figure of a 6-month-old girl sleeping soundlessly in her crib. Her tiny chest rose and fell with a careful rhythm, the kind of breath that demanded vigilance. But her legs remained still, unmoving beneath the soft cotton onesie. 3 months of paralysis. 3 months of doctors and specialists and words that filled Sarah's ears but never her heart, words like neuromuscular degeneration, unknown cause. Words that left her with nothing but questions. Nothing but silence. Near the crib, curled in an improbable ball of spotted fur, lay Sage, a bobcat kitten barely larger than a house cat, his tufted ears flickering at every creak the old house made. His small body, usually a blur of restless energy and playful pounces, was perfectly still tonight. He kept his amber eyes trained on Lily, unwavering, patient. It was not the wild watchfulness of an animal in a strange environment. It was something deeper. Something Sarah couldn't quite name. In the living room, Daniel sat hunched forward, elbows on knees, staring into a darkened fireplace that hadn't been lit in weeks. His hands were clasped tightly together, the knuckles white. They hadn't spoken much that evening, or the one before that. Words felt too sharp, too small for the cavernous ache between them. Only the low hum of the baby monitor broke the stillness, transmitting Lily's quiet breathing across the house like a fragile thread tethering them to hope. Sarah closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, the blanket pressed tighter against her chest. In the hush of the broken night, between the weight of all they had lost and all they still dared to wish for, Sage lifted his small head and waited. Because something was about to happen. Something that no one, not even the sharpest minds or the bravest hearts, could have predicted. There had been a time, not so long ago, when the house was filled with music. Not the kind you hear from radios or record players, but the pure, unruly music of a life just beginning, the gurgles and squeals of a baby discovering her own voice, the soft thumps of tiny feet kicking at the air, the laughter of 2 parents learning what it meant to love something more than themselves. Lily had arrived on a crisp winter morning, wrapped in layers of knitted blankets, and the kind of fragile hope that only a newborn brings. Her bright blue eyes had seemed far too large for her small face, drinking in the world with unblinking wonder. From the moment Sarah first held her daughter, something fundamental shifted inside her, as if every question she'd ever asked had been answered in the weight of that tiny, perfect body. Daniel, roughened from years of work outdoors, had been softer with Lily than Sarah had ever seen him. He would cradle her in one arm, his calloused fingers brushing lightly over her downy hair, and whisper stories about the adventures they would have, hiking through the mountains, teaching her to fish, building forts in the backyard. There had been so much future back then. Sarah remembered the simple joys, diaper changes that turned into giggle fits, bath times that ended with Lily squealing under warm towels, nights where she would rock her gently by the window, singing lullabies to the rhythm of the wind outside. For 3 fleeting months, their world was whole. Then, almost imperceptibly, it began to change. First, it was little things, so small Sarah thought she was imagining them. Lily didn't kick quite as hard during diaper changes. She didn't squirm as much when the breeze from an open window stirred her hair. She began to stare longer at the ceiling, arms limp at her sides. Sarah told herself it was normal. Some babies are just calmer, she said, smiling thinly to friends who asked. But deep down, something cold and certain had begun to curl inside her. By the 4th month, there was no denying it. Lily's legs hung heavier during baths. She stopped reaching for the toys that dangled brightly above her crib. Her cries became fewer, her stillness deeper. Sarah and Daniel went from worry to fear in a heartbeat. Doctors' visits turned into specialist appointments. Waiting rooms blurred into hospital corridors. Clipboards, blood tests, MRI scans. Faces behind masks, murmuring words no young parents should ever have to hear. Finally, one heavy afternoon in late spring, the words they dreaded most arrived. A rare neuromuscular condition. Progressive. No clear treatment. No timeline. Just waiting. Waiting for what? No one could quite say. Waiting for hope, maybe? Or for its opposite? Sarah barely remembered leaving the hospital that day. She only remembered how cold the car seat buckle felt in her hands, and how Lily lay there quietly, blinking up at her mother with those wide, unknowing eyes, trusting, even now, in a world that seemed to have abandoned her. From that day on, the music left the house. The laughter dimmed. And every room, every breath, felt like it belonged to a future that had slipped just beyond their reach. The weeks after the diagnosis blurred together like watercolors left too long in the rain. Sarah moved through the house on autopilot, her body doing what her mind refused to acknowledge, measuring formula, scheduling therapy appointments, singing half-finished lullabies into the hush of a room that once danced with life. The nursery became a shrine to what had been. The rocking chair, once in constant motion, now sat still in the corner, draped in a blanket no one picked up. The mobile above Lily's crib, a cheerful swirl of stars and moons, spun lazily whenever a draft passed through, playing its silent song to a child who could no longer reach for it. Toys collected dust on shelves. Tiny socks remained folded in drawers, unworn. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Daniel retreated into his work, long hours at the construction site, extra shifts whenever he could get them. It was easier to pour concrete and drive nails than to sit still and listen to the hollow quiet of the house pressing in around him. At night, Sarah and Daniel would sit side by side on the couch, not touching, not speaking, each lost in a different kind of grief. Sometimes Sarah would catch Daniel glancing toward the nursery door, just a flick of the eyes, so fast it might have been imagined, and she knew he was listening for sounds that never came. For laughter. For cries. For any sign that their daughter was still fighting. But the house had grown heavy with stillness, and the longer it lingered, the heavier it became. In the rare moments they allowed themselves to dream, those dreams always ended at the same place. A backyard they'd never see Lily run across, a first day of school they'd never walk her to, a lifetime of tiny heartbreaks stitched into every unspoken thought. Sarah found herself waking in the middle of the night sometimes, heart pounding, reaching instinctively for the baby monitor, terrified she'd find the screen dark. But every time, Lily was there, breathing, alive, silent. And yet the silence felt like a different kind of death. The house, once so full of love and noise and motion, had forgotten how to breathe. So had they. It was Sarah's sister, Anna, who finally said what no one else dared to. "You need something different in that house," she insisted one rainy afternoon, her voice firm but kind. "Something alive. Something new." Sarah had barely looked up from her cup of cold coffee. "Alive," she repeated hollowly, as if the word had lost all meaning. Anna didn't argue. She just pressed a warm hand onto Sarah's shoulder and said, "Just trust me." The next weekend, Anna returned, and she wasn't alone. Bundled tightly in a thick flannel blanket was a small creature, all oversized paws, tufted ears, and nervous, darting eyes. At first, Sarah thought it was a strange-looking kitten. But when the blanket slipped away, she realized this wasn't a house cat. It was a bobcat. A bobcat kitten, no older than a few months, skinny but sturdy, with faint spots still visible through his short coat. His muscles coiled under his tiny frame as he squirmed in Anna's arms, restless and wary. "They found him orphaned up north," Anna explained, her voice gentle. "His mother likely chased off by loggers. He's too young to survive alone, and the local rescue couldn't place him." Sarah blinked, struggling to find words. "A bobcat, Anna? A wild animal? We can barely take care of ourselves." "I know," Anna said. "But maybe he can take care of you." Daniel entered from the back door, wiping rain from his face. He froze at the sight. The bobcat met his gaze, sharp, wild, unblinking. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, without warning, the bobcat wriggled free from the blanket and landed lightly on the hardwood floor. He didn't bolt. He didn't cower. He walked, bold and cautious, toward the nursery door. Sarah's breath caught. Sage, they later named him. That first day, Sage padded straight to Lily's crib, his small nose twitching, ears erect. He stood on his hind legs, front paws barely brushing the edge of the crib, and peered inside. The room, heavy with sorrow, seemed to exhale around him. Sarah and Daniel watched in stunned silence as Sage settled down at the base of the crib, his spotted body curling into a loose spiral, his eyes never leaving the small, still form of their daughter. He didn't meow. He didn't purr. He simply stayed. As if he understood exactly where he was needed most. At first, Sarah thought it was just coincidence. Maybe Sage was curious. Maybe the nursery smelled different, or the soft hum of the baby monitor caught his attention. Wild animals, even young ones, were unpredictable. You couldn't expect loyalty from a creature still half belonging to the woods. But day after day, Sage chose the same spot, right beside Lily's crib. Every morning when Sarah opened the nursery door, she found him there, a small, silent guardian, curled into a tight ball at the base of the crib, his golden eyes heavy but alert. He wouldn't leave, not even when Sarah brought in food or adjusted the blankets. He'd simply shift his body slightly, always keeping Lily within his line of sight. He didn't play with the toys scattered around the house. He didn't claw the furniture or stalk shadows. He stayed. And somehow, that tiny act, the staying, began to stitch something back together inside Sarah. One afternoon, when a storm rolled over the valley, rattling the windows and sending branches tapping against the glass, Sage lifted his head and fixed his gaze on Lily. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart tight, as the bobcat rose, stretched his lean frame, and leapt silently onto the chair beside the crib. From there, he lowered his head onto the edge of the mattress, just inches from Lily's tiny hand. And then, he waited. He didn't touch her. He didn't prod. He simply offered his presence, like a stone offering shelter from the rain. Sarah stepped closer, hardly daring to breathe. Lily lay still, her breathing slow and shallow, as always. But as Sage's breath brushed against her hand, a faint flicker of movement passed across her tiny fingers, almost reflexive, like a whisper against the stillness. Sarah's heart stumbled in her chest. Was it real? Or just a trick of the light? She didn't know. And in that moment, it didn't matter. Because for the first time in months, Lily was not alone in her silence. She was seen. She was felt. Sage's presence changed the rhythm of the house in ways too subtle to name at first. Sarah noticed it in the mornings, when the despair didn't settle as heavily on her chest. Daniel noticed it in the evenings, when he lingered longer at the nursery door instead of pretending the room didn't exist. The house still felt fragile, still weighed down by worry, but somewhere beneath the sorrow, a new pulse had begun to beat. Not loud. Not demanding. Just steady. Like the soft, unwavering stare of a wild creature who refused to look away. The evening began like so many others, a slow, heavy crawl toward midnight. The house was wrapped in its familiar hush. The baby monitor hummed softly beside the couch where Sarah sat, one hand absently tracing the worn threads of Lily's old swaddling blanket. Across the room, Daniel flipped through a folder of therapy paperwork he wasn't really reading, the pages shifting but the words refusing to settle. Sage, as always, was curled at the base of Lily's crib, a silent sentry in the growing dark. But tonight something was different. Sarah noticed it first, a ripple, a restlessness moving through the little bobcat's body. Sage stood, his tufted ears twitching, and paced to the nursery door, tail low, movements sharp and deliberate. Then he turned and looked straight at Sarah. There was nothing wild in his gaze. No fear. No confusion. Only urgency. He padded into the living room, walked a slow circle at Sarah's feet, then trotted back to the nursery door. Scratched it, once, twice, with deliberate pause. Then waited. Sarah's stomach twisted with sudden fear. Without a word, she rose and followed him. The nursery was just as she had left it, the same soft glow of the night light, the same steady breathing from the crib. But Sage didn't stop. He sprang up onto the rocking chair beside the crib, placed his front paws gently on the mattress edge, and leaned close, his nose nearly touching Lily's tiny hand. Sarah approached slowly, heart hammering against her ribs. And then she saw it. The faintest movement, a twitch, so small it could have been missed, in Lily's curled fingers. Sarah blinked, thinking she imagined it. Then it happened again. A slow, tentative tightening of her daughter's tiny hand, not a random jerk, not a reflex, but a motion. A reach. Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Daniel!" she cried, voice trembling with the force of her disbelief. "Come here! Quickly!" Daniel crashed through the doorway seconds later, his eyes wide and disbelieving. Together they stood at the crib, staring in stunned silence as Lily's fingers moved, first a flutter, then a hesitant clench, as if testing the memory of touch. Tears blurred Sarah's vision. She reached down, slid a trembling finger into Lily's hand. And this time, Lily held on. Not a weak, accidental graze. A real grip, soft, imperfect, but alive. Daniel let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. He pressed his forehead against Sarah's shoulder, shaking with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. Sage remained where he was, his amber eyes calm, almost expectant, as if he had known all along that this moment would come. And in that quiet nursery, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the silence was no longer heavy with sorrow. It was full of something else entirely. Hope. The days that followed moved differently, as if the house itself had taken a breath after holding it for too long. It began with the smallest things. A flicker of toes during diaper changes. A faint stretch of Lily's foot beneath her soft pink blanket. The tiniest wrinkle of her nose when Sage's whiskers brushed against her hand. Sarah and Daniel became watchers, of every tremor, every shift, every flutter of movement their daughter offered. No motion was too small to celebrate. No change went unnoticed. The physical therapist, a kind woman named Claire who had walked them through months of disappointment, sat back one afternoon and blinked in amazement as Lily, lying on her mat, lifted her arm an inch off the ground. "This kind of progress usually takes months," Claire murmured, shaking her head with a smile. Sometimes years." Sarah's hands trembled as she helped Lily stretch, her heart swelling with something too fierce for words. Their daughter was waking up. And through it all, Sage remained. He had no interest in toys, no need for the kind of chaos other young bobcats might crave. Instead, he became Lily's constant companion, a shadow stitched to her side. During therapy sessions, Sage would perch nearby, his body still and watchful. When Lily grew tired, her tiny face crumpling with frustration, Sage would inch closer, laying his head gently near her feet, offering his quiet presence like a balm. Sarah often found herself marveling at the little bobcat, how he seemed to understand without being taught, how he never demanded, never intruded. Just stayed. One morning, Sarah came into the nursery to find Lily giggling, a soft, bubbly sound that filled the room like sunlight. Sage sat by the crib, his tail twitching lazily, batting a small cloth bunny toward Lily's waiting hands. And Lily, smiling wider than Sarah had seen in months, reached for it. Not stumbled toward it. Not dreamed of it. Reached. Her fingers clutched the toy clumsily, triumphantly. Sarah collapsed onto the chair, her face buried in her hands, laughter and tears spilling out in equal measure. Daniel found her there minutes later, and when he saw Lily, arms waving, toy in hand, he didn't speak. He simply wrapped his arms around Sarah, and together, they watched their daughter come back to life, one small miracle at a time. That evening, as twilight painted the walls in shades of gold and lavender, Sarah stood at the nursery window, cradling Lily against her chest. Below her, the fields stretched wide and open, the trees dancing in the gentle breeze. Sage sat on the windowsill, his reflection blending into the dusky glass, his eyes fixed outward, watchful, patient, as always. Sarah looked down at him and whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Thank you?" The bobcat twitched an ear but didn't turn. Outside, the world stirred with quiet life. And inside, in the small house that had once forgotten how to breathe, hope moved in the halls again, soft, certain, unstoppable. It wasn't just Lily who changed. It was the house. It was them. The walls that once felt heavy with silence now echoed with new sounds, the soft thump of Lily kicking her feet against the crib mattress, the breathy giggles that escaped her when Sage batted a toy her way, the quiet hum of lullabies Sarah found herself singing again without even realizing. Life was seeping back into the corners where grief had made its home. Sarah noticed it first in the mornings, the way Daniel lingered a little longer over breakfast instead of rushing off to work. How he smiled, just a small curve of the mouth, when he peeked into the nursery before grabbing his tool belt. And Daniel saw it too, how Sarah's voice, once brittle and tired, now carried a softness again when she spoke to Lily. How she moved through the house not like a ghost, but like a mother. They weren't healed, not fully. Some wounds leave scars too deep to ever vanish. But they were learning to hold each other's broken pieces again. One evening, Sarah found Daniel standing in the doorway of Lily's room, arms crossed loosely over his chest, just watching as Sage nosed a soft ball toward Lily, who squealed with delight as she batted it back with her tiny, determined hands. "She's coming back to us," Daniel said quietly, his voice thick with wonder. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered back, "No, we're coming back to her." They stood there, side by side, letting the moment wash over them, not trying to capture it or define it, just being in it. And in that stillness, they realized something simple but profound. They hadn't lost everything. Not if there was love left to give. Sage remained at the heart of it all. He didn't ask for attention, didn't demand gratitude. He was simply there, steady, silent, patient. On the hard days, when Lily's legs refused to move as much as they had the day before, when fear crept back into the cracks of their hope, Sage would curl himself tightly against Lily's side, his body a small, fierce reminder that presence was its own kind of miracle. He didn't promise the future. He didn't erase the past. He just stayed. And somehow, in the wild, stubborn rhythm of his heart, Sarah and Daniel found the courage to stay, too, to keep hoping, even when hope felt foolish, to keep loving, even when fear still whispered at the edges. Their house wasn't perfect. But it was alive again. And sometimes, alive was more than enough.